Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at a potential trade deal between India and New Zealand. It's kind of like, well, imagine you're trying to plan a dinner party at the same time that your neighbors are having like a massive block party.
Yeah.
A lot's going on that could really affect things.
Yeah, absolutely. And what makes this even more interesting is the backdrop. We're not just talking economics here. I mean, we're looking at these two countries trying to strengthen their relationship while also figuring out how to navigate a world where, China's influence is growing, especially in the Indo-Pacific.
Right. And it's not even a new idea, this whole partnership thing. They've tried to make it happen before, haven't they?
Exactly. India and New Zealand have been going back and forth on a free trade agreement, an FTA, since like 2015, I think it was. And they even looked into working together in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the RCEP.
Yeah.
That was a huge trade deal that included a bunch of Asian Pacific nations. But India decided to pull out of that back in 2019.
So why is it back on the table now? What's changed?
Well, New Zealand's Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, is on a trip to India right now. It's a diplomatic visit, and he's made trade a top priority. Actually, he's been pretty upfront about it, saying he's going to push trade really, really hard during the trip.
Wow. Okay. That's pretty straightforward. It sounds like New Zealand is really ready to strengthen this relationship. Why is that?
Well, if you look at the numbers, New Zealand currently exports about $1.5 billion worth of goods to India. Now, compare that to their trade with China. It's a huge difference, almost $40 billion. So you can kind of see why they're looking to branch out and maybe find other trading partners, not put all their eggs in one basket, so to speak.
That makes sense. But what about India? I mean, they have their own things they're looking for in this area.
Sure. India's being careful, especially because they have a general election coming up. They're probably going to focus on deals that are really good for Indian industries, especially agriculture. So things could get pretty intense in those negotiations.
Okay. So how does this push for trade tie into the whole China situation we were talking about? It sounds like there's more to it than just wanting to sell more things.
Right. New Zealand is definitely looking to counterbalance China's growing influence in the Pacific, and getting closer to India could help them do that.
So it's like a strategic move, not just about the economics.
Exactly. Think of it this way. China's been ramping up its naval presence in the Pacific and, strengthening its ties with island nations. And that's raised some concerns in New Zealand and other countries too. So they're looking for ways to keep things stable and balanced. And India, with its own pretty strong military presence in the Indo-Pacific, looks like a good potential partner.
Okay, so they both have some concerns about China. But how would this trade deal actually help New Zealand achieve those goals?
Well, a strong economic partnership can lead to more cooperation in other areas like defense. And actually, India and New Zealand are already working together on some defense projects. For example, they both use the P-8 Poseidon aircraft, which means they can do joint maritime patrols and surveillance.
So even before a trade deal, they're already doing some military stuff together.
Yeah, and it will probably increase. New Zealand is about to release its defense capability plan. That's their long-term defense strategy. And given Luxon's visit and this focus on stronger ties with India, I think we can bet that defense cooperation will be a big part of their talks.
So we've got this backdrop of China and everything and the push for stronger ties. But what would this trade deal actually look like? I mean, what are they actually talking about putting in this deal?
Well, on New Zealand's side, it's pretty simple. They want to sell more stuff to India. India has a massive and growing middle class, which means huge potential for New Zealand businesses, especially in areas like dairy meat, even technology.
Okay, and I'm guessing India isn't just going to, open its markets to New Zealand without wanting something in return, right?
No, of course not. India is looking for better access for their products and services in New Zealand, too. Things like pharmaceuticals, textiles, IT services, that sort of thing. They also see this as a way to attract investment from New Zealand and create jobs back home.
So it could be a win-win for both.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier that India might be a little hesitant. Are there any, roadblocks that could make things tricky?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Agriculture is going to be a big one. New Zealand is a powerhouse when it comes to dairy and meat production. And of course, Indian farmers are going to be worried about being undercut by cheaper imports if the market opens up too quickly.
Yeah, that makes sense. We've seen this happen before in other trade deals where countries protect their agricultural sectors. So how do you think they'll handle this?
Well, it'll take some careful negotiating for sure. They might set up quotas to limit how much of certain products can come in. Or maybe put in some safeguards that would kick in if imports start flooding the market and hurting domestic industries. It won't be easy finding that middle ground where everyone benefits.
And beyond those specific product issues, are there any other challenges they might run into?
Yeah, you know what we often forget about are the non-tariff barriers. Those are things like regulations, standards, bureaucratic stuff that can really make it hard for businesses to work across borders.
So even if they agree on tariffs, the taxes on imports, there's this whole other layer of complexity to figure out.
Exactly. Imagine New Zealand's strict food safety standards clashing with India's traditional production methods. That's a non-tariff barrier they'd have to sort out to make trade run smoothly. Streamlining those kinds of differences is super important.
Okay, so let's say they do manage to work out all these details and actually sign a deal. What are the bigger implications? I mean, what does this mean for the whole region?
Well, from a geopolitical perspective, a successful trade deal would be a pretty big statement. It would show that India and New Zealand are serious about working together and, promoting economic integration in the Indo-Pacific, especially now when China is becoming more assertive.
So it's not just about the economics. It's about presenting a united front and pushing back against China's influence a little.
Exactly. It shows these two democracies working together to create a more stable and prosperous region, maybe one that offers an alternative to China's model.
It makes you wonder how China might react to this. Wouldn't a stronger India-New Zealand partnership kind of worry them?
It's definitely possible. China's always been cautious about anything that looks like an attempt to limit their influence. They'll be watching this closely.
But even if China's not thrilled about it, both India and New Zealand already trade with them. So they're not trying to cut China out completely, right?
No, not at all. It's more about creating a more balanced system where no single country has all the power, a multipolar regional order.
And what about other countries in the region? Would they be affected by this deal?
For sure. Take Australia, for example. They're close partners with both India and New Zealand. They see India as a key player in the Indo-Pacific and would likely welcome a stronger India-New Zealand partnership because it fits with their own strategic goals.
So we've gone from what seemed like a straightforward trade deal to something that could potentially shift the whole balance of power in the region. It's crazy how interconnected everything is.
It really shows how trade is never just about economics. It's all tied up with geopolitics strategy, the bigger picture of who has power in the world. The stakes are a lot higher than they might seem at first glance.
And even beyond the political implications, there's the potential for, cultural exchange and stronger connections between people when you have closer economic ties.
That's another fascinating aspect of it. When trade increases, it often leads to more understanding and collaboration between people from different cultures. It opens up opportunities for sharing ideas and perspectives, which can be really enriching.
It feels like we've just scratched the surface here. We've looked at why they want this trade deal, the potential benefits and the obstacles, and even the broader geopolitical impact. But there's still so much more to unpack.
You're absolutely right. This is a complex issue with lots of layers. We could easily talk for another hour about trade policy or the intricacies of Indo-Pacific security, but I think it's important to step back for a second and look at the bigger picture, the really important takeaway from all of this.
Okay, so we've covered so much ground, but we had to sum it all up. What's the big takeaway here? What's the main point we should really focus on?
I think we're seeing like a real shift in the global balance of power.
Yeah.
Old alliances are being reevaluated, new partnerships are popping up, the world's becoming more multipolar, and this potential trade deal between India and New Zealand is a perfect example of that shift in action.
So this is bigger than just a regional story. This is part of like a global realignment.
Yeah, exactly. And for our listeners out there who might be thinking, well, why should I care about this? It's important to remember that these big global shifts can have real consequences. They can impact everything from, how much things cost at the grocery store to, national security policies.
It's easy to think about geopolitics as something that's happening far away and doesn't really affect us. But you're right, it actually does impact our everyday lives.
Absolutely. And this story with India and New Zealand, it's still unfolding. There are still so many questions to be answered.
Like what? What should we be paying attention to as this develops?
Well, the first thing is to keep an eye on the trade negotiations themselves. Can they actually work out those issues we talked about, like the agriculture concerns and those non-tariff barriers? And if they do make a deal, what will it actually say? Will it be a really comprehensive agreement or something more limited?
And beyond the actual deal,
Yeah,
what about how other countries react?
that's important too. Yeah. How will China respond? Will they see this partnership as a threat to their interests in the region? And what about other big players like Australia and the United States? Will they support this new alliance or see it as something to be suspicious of?
Wow, so many things could happen. Feels like we're at the end of a movie and waiting for the sequel to see what happens next.
That's a great way to put it. But while we're waiting for those next chapters, there's a really big question for you, our listeners, to think about. If this trade deal actually happens, what could it mean for the balance of power globally, especially in the Indo-Pacific? How might this affect other countries like Australia or the US?
That's a great question to think about. And it really highlights how we've only just dipped our toes into this whole world of international relations and trade. We really encourage you to keep exploring these topics and really dig deeper into what's going on. Because in a world that's becoming more and more interconnected, understanding these relationships is more important than ever.
Well said. There's always more to learn, and the more we know, the better we'll be able to handle the challenges and opportunities that are coming our way.
That's a great point to end on. We hope you enjoy this deep dive into trade geopolitics and the changing alliances that are shaping our future. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep learning.